I will be reading Luke 21:25-36. There will be signs in the sun, moon, and stars. On the earth, nations will be in anguish and perplexity at the roaring and tossing of the sea. People will faint from terror, apprehensive of what is coming on the world. For the heavenly bodies will be shaken. At that time they will see the Son of Man coming in a cloud with power and with great glory. When these things begin to take place, stand up and lift up your heads, because your redemption is drawing near. He told them this parable: look at the fig tree and all the trees. When they sprout leaves, you can see for yourselves and know that summer is near. Even so, when you see these things happening, you know that the kingdom of God is near. Truly I tell you, this generation will certainly not pass away until all these things have happened. Heaven and earth will pass away, but my words will never pass away. Be careful, or your hearts will be weighted down with carousing, drunkenness, and the anxieties of life, and that day will close on you suddenly like a trap. For it will come on all those who live on the face of the whole earth. Be always on the watch and pray that you may be able to escape all that is about to happen, and that you may be able to stand before the Son of Man.
Two Fridays ago, I found myself standing in a line, and I was frustrated, and I was angry. And you might be thinking to yourself, 2 Fridays ago, that was Black Friday, right? It was. But I was not standing in a Black Friday line. I was standing in a memorial greeting line for a young woman in her 30s who had passed away from cancer. She had a beautiful little boy. Her husband and her entire family were there at the greeting line, and I was just watching. And as I was going through and I was looking at the tables, and I was seeing over and over again this beautiful, vibrant face of this incredible young woman who was a field hockey player and had a tremendous job and was a great mother and a great wife. And I'm just watching this, and all I could think in my heart over and over again is, this is so unfair. This shouldn't happen, God. And I got to the front of the line, and I met the young woman's father. And he looked at me, and he gave me a hug, and the first thing he said to me was, "Boy, this feels an awful lot like your dad, doesn't it?" He started consoling me. And I thought, God, this is so incredibly unfair. How does this happen? And I went down through the line, and I greeted brothers and sisters, and I greeted the mother, and I walked past the casket. And I just couldn't understand. How does this happen? Why does this happen? What kind of world do we live in, filled with all of this brokenness? That week leads us into Advent. Advent is a time where we think about what's coming, the hope that is to come. In Advent, we recognize that the world right now is not the way that it's supposed to be, that people disappoint us, that we make mistakes, that all sorts of terrible, challenging things happen. Yes, there are lots of great things too. But many of us understand that life can be incredibly hard. Advent reminds us of that. It's amazing to me that this season comes right in the middle of the winter, When we look outside and it's dark and it's dreary and it's raining, and we recognize we are in the midst of the bleak midwinter. Advent is a time of naming that. Advent is a time of lament and looking forward. And we journey with ancient Israel, who struggled. Ancient Israel, as we had read by the Gers family so lovely this morning, words from Jeremiah. Behold, the days are coming, declares the Lord, when I will fulfill the promise that I made to the house of Israel and the house of Judah. In those days and at that time I will cause a righteous branch to spring up for David, and he shall execute justice and righteousness in the land. In those days Judah will be saved, Jerusalem will dwell securely, and this is the name by which it will be called, the Lord our righteousness. Israel was waiting, Israel was longing, feeling separated from their God. Their temple was destroyed, their king was a joke. They were living in exile. So I want you to imagine for a moment, let's try and take ourselves there if we can. Just sort of step out of where we're at right now. And maybe imagine yourself as a small child, a small Hebrew child. And you're in an earthen home with a thatched roof. And maybe there's a little fire going in the oven, the pit in the side of the room. And mom and dad are off talking about politics. Justice and righteousness in the land. Talking about the words that Jeremiah the prophet was preaching. And you're sitting at the feet of your beloved grandmother. And you're sitting there and it's just time, Grandma, please tell me again. Tell me the stories of Moses. Tell me about the plagues. Tell me about the way that God brought Israel out of slavery. Tell me about the stories of David and his son Solomon, who built the temple so beautiful. Grandma, tell me about every piece of that temple and what all the elements meant. Tell me about the gold. Tell me about the silver and the bronze and the beauty. Tell me about the good old days when God was present with us, because right now we feel like he is completely and utterly missing. And mother and father are talking about justice and righteousness in the land. One of my commentaries that I stumbled upon writing about Jeremiah 34, he says this. I should have quoted the author, but I didn't write it down. I apologize. He'll have to forgive me. He won't ever know about it. In these oracles, the prophet focuses on the leadership of the future, specifically the royal priestly leadership of David and the Levites, the priests. The passage echoes chapters 22 and 23 of Jeremiah, recalling the failure of the political leadership to render justice and righteousness in the community, and announcing God's intention to provide leaders who will do just that. The restoration, the salvation of our fortunes is not therefore simply a matter of abundance, having lots of stuff, productivity, or partying. It also includes the reestablishment of systems of governance and creating leaders who will rightly render the affairs of the people and will lead them in their worship of the Lord. Sometimes it strikes me the way these old stories from thousands of years ago strike the exact same feelings that we have today. I don't know about you, but I'm frustrated with a governmental system that just seems completely focused on stopping the other side from winning. If we can stop them from winning, we all lose, we are successful. How does that work? And yet, yesterday, we hear stories of a president who was known for reaching across the aisle. A president, George H.W. Bush, who worked so hard with the enemy, the Soviet Union, and finally saw Germany reunited and didn't take any credit because he wanted the president of the Soviet Union to get all the credit to continue to keep that relationship healthy and well. I long for something different from our government. I long for things to be different from what they used to be. Another passage of longing that may have been something that Mom and Dad were thinking about as Grandma was weaving stories of the greatness of God in the past. Psalm 25. If you have your Bibles and you want to open and follow along, you can, or I will read it to you. Psalm 25, verse 1. To you, O Lord, I lift up my soul. O my God, in you I trust. Let me not be put to shame. Let not my enemies exalt over me. One of the things I love about the Psalms is the Psalms, it seems like over and over again, the psalmists are like preaching about what they, I trust God. We're going to trust God. It's like they're saying the words like they're almost trying to convince themselves. Because then he says, let me not be put to shame. Shame. Many of us are probably longing for a day where we never experience shame. Shame is one of the most powerful emotions, and people that have studied shame have found that shame is one of those emotions that travels across every single culture. Everyone experiences shame. He goes on in verse 3, indeed, none who wait for you shall be put to shame. They shall be ashamed who are wantonly treacherous. Verse 4, make me to know your ways, O Lord, teach me your paths. Verse 5, lead me in your truth and teach me, for you are the God of my salvation. For you I will wait all the day long. Well, I don't know about you. One of my biggest problems with this whole thing is I hate waiting. I want to be over mourning my father's death right now. I want to be over any sorts of issues with my children and just have perfect little creatures and perfect parents right now. I want everything right this minute. And the psalmist says, wait. Wait. Verse 25, 6. Remember your mercy, O Lord, and your steadfast love. Remember us, Lord. Remember us. Don't forget me. Right here I am. Bless us. Be with us. Because we don't feel your presence. Remember not the sins of my youth or my transgressions according to your steadfast love. Remember me for the sake of your goodness. We are lost and we struggle. From the mouth of Jesus in Luke 21, there will be signs in the sun and the moon and in the stars and on the earth, distress of nations. There we go again. In perplexity because of the roaring sea and the waves and the forest fires and the earthquakes and the hurricanes and the rain day after day after day. The rain that collapses barn walls and leaks through roofs. And the people are fainting with fear and with foreboding. The people are fainting with fear and the foreboding. Did you know that on November 19th, let me see if I have this straight. On November 19th, there had been 314 mass shootings in 2018. November 19th in the United States, 314 mass shootings. People are living in fear. I long for a time of peace. I long for a time when city schools won't have to use metal detectors for children to go and learn. I long for a time where we won't have to be fearful of being in large spaces with lots of people for what might happen. Life is hard. It can be. I long for a day when 25% of our children, I got that wrong, 21% of our children will not be living in poverty. I long for a day when 15.6 million people will not be food insecure while restaurants all over our country are throwing away food, and I continue to eat way too much. Sometimes this life is not fair. Sometimes it's incredibly hard. Each and every one of us, I'm sure, has something going on. Some little part of us. We come to church and we all look perfect and we all have it all together, but I know that deep down inside there is something that we wrestle with, something that we long for, more peace, more joy, more hope, more Jesus. Deep longings. This past week, as our staff devotional, we talked about that which we long for. And just in our small circle, heard about people longing for health for their children, longing for relationships with aging family members, longing for health and healing. And somebody had the braveness to stand up and say, hey, I'm just longing to get through Christmas. You know, we have those people out there that, start playing the Christmas music 3 weeks before Thanksgiving and have their houses decorated and are just filled with joy and bubbling all the time, but that's not how it is for everyone. For some people, Christmas is hard. I'm going to be honest. People told me Easter or Thanksgiving was going to be hard, and I was like, nah, I'm going to be fine. Thanksgiving was hard. I'm not looking forward to Christmas. We long for more peace, for more joy, for more hope. Now, part of the beauty of Advent, as we are called into the bleak midwinter, Jesus also promises us that the kingdom is coming. Jesus promises us that we will start to see signs of joy and hope and peace. But I'm not ready to go there yet today. Today, we lament. Today, we recognize that life is not always the way that it's supposed to be. Jesus says in chapter 21, verse 34, he says, watch yourselves, lest your hearts be weighed down with dissipation and drunkenness and cares of this life, and that day come upon you suddenly like a trap. The day that we see God breaking into the world. Don't fall asleep and miss it. Sometimes the brokenness can be so hard, sometimes the unfairness can be so challenging that we feel like we either have to run away from it or we have to seek other things. Worldly pleasures, alcohol, jobs, pursuit of money, to get away from the pain, to get away from the struggles that we have. Sometimes we need Advent as a time to remember, as a time where Jesus calls us, wake up, and gives us the permission to say, life is hard. Life is unfair. I think I've said this before, but one of the most powerful things that strikes me about the 23rd Psalm, one of my favorites, if not my favorite, is this beautiful psalm about life with Christ. Jesus is the shepherd and we are the sheep. And it tells us how Jesus will lead us to green pastures and still waters. It's such a beautiful picture. But in the middle, there's that terrible, that travel through darkness, the dark valley. And on the other side, we get to sit at the table of our enemies with our heads held high, eating with God. But there is that dark place. And Psalm 23 pretty much admits it. Yeah. We're going to have dark valleys. We're going to have times when our relationships aren't going the way that we want them to be. There's going to be times where the weight of the world is going to feel so heavy that we don't know how we're ever going to get through. But Jesus' rod and his staff, God's presence, is with us. The very God that created all of us sent his very Son to be with us, to walk by our side. Not necessarily to take away all the pain, not necessarily to make all of the world fair again, but to be with us. And that is enough. Part of being awake sometimes is just stating it. It's true. Life's hard. Cancer stinks. I'd like to use a stronger word, but I don't know that it would be appropriate. Losing family members long before we ever should, it's just not right. And we can run from the morning, we can run from the pain, or we can try and numb it, or we can wake up and we can name it and we can face it with Jesus, with his rod and his staff by our side. Jesus calls us to wait, eyes wide open. The world that we live in is hard, but Jesus is with us, and we have each other, and we will get through. We'll start talking about the kingdom breaking in the next couple of weeks, but today, I just want to allow us to feel it. The pain, the loss. In this next song that we are going to sing, In the Bleak Midwinter, chosen perfectly, I believe, you are going to have the opportunity, if you would like. There will be two people, I think, over by the cross to pray, and I think I'm going to be up here somewhere trying to stay out of Richard's way. If you want to come forward, if you want to name that thing that you long for, if you want to name the hardness of your life, if you want to name something that's unfair, please feel free. Or maybe you just do it as you sit or you stand and sing. Each and every one of us has a longing. We're here for you, and we will pray for you, and we will listen as we sing. I would invite you all to stand.